Blind, have low vision, or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the February 17th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. As always, thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are: record CEO turnover at U.S. public companies has put the biggest class of incoming chief executives in years at the helm of massive enterprises, and the newcomers are younger and less experienced than before. Companies from Levi Strauss to McCormick say they are raising prices early this year on a range of products after holding the line for several months. Early gains for U.S. stock futures faded, suggesting investors remain cautious ahead of a data-heavy week. U.S. markets were closed for President's Day. Goldman Sachs is preparing to remove race, gender identity, sexual orientation, and other diversity factors from the criteria its board will consider when identifying potential candidates. Anderson Cooper will be leaving CBS News' 60 Minutes after the current season, a high-profile departure for the storied TV news magazine. Activist investor Elliott has built a more than 10% stake in Norwegian Cruise Line and plans to push for changes to turn the struggling cruise ship operator around. Casey Wasserman put his talent and marketing agency up for sale following the release of suggestive emails he exchanged years ago with Epstein associate Ghislaine Maxwell. Thomas Pritzker is retiring as chief executive chairman of Hyatt Hotels, saying he wanted to protect the company after documents detailed the extent of his association with Epstein and Maxwell. Smithfield Foods plans to build a large hog slaughterhouse in South Dakota, marking the first new facility built by the top U.S. pork producer in decades. Traders and investors say they are growing more accustomed to sudden, unexpected news that triggers outsized market swings. Hapag Lloyd will buy Israeli competitor Zim for $4.2 billion as the German shipping company looks to bolster its capacity. Now for the key articles under the Worldwide section. Secretary of State Marco Rubio made an unapologetic defense of American might and pursuit of national interest while seeking to recast Trump's disputes with Europe as a form of tough love with the U.S.'s closest allies. Iran's top diplomat met with the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog agency ahead of a second round of talks with the U.S. over Tehran's nuclear program. The U.S. military airlifted a miniature nuclear reactor for the first time, part of Trump's push to deploy nuclear energy for the grid across the country. 2 people were killed and 3 were injured in a shooting at a Rhode Island high school hockey game that Pawtucket Police Chief Tina Gonsalves said was potentially linked to a family dispute. Russian dissident Alexei Navalny's death in an Arctic prison colony 2 years ago was almost certainly caused by a poison derived from a rare frog toxin, several European governments said. Doctors Without Borders suspended all non-critical services at a Gaza hospital, alleging that the facility was being used by armed men to intimidate and arrest patients and potentially move weapons. New York City's projected budget shortfall of as much as $12 billion over the next 2 years threatens to curb Mayor Zoran Mandani's ambitious affordability agenda. Much of California was preparing to be hit by a powerful winter storm, carrying treacherous thunderstorms, high winds, and heavy snow in mountain areas. Died Robert Duvall, 95, Oscar-winning actor. The picture on today's front page shows an Asian man lighting what appears to be a stick candle as others are doing the same. And the caption reads, "Main Event." Worshippers burned large incense sticks on Monday outside a temple in Hong Kong to mark the Lunar New Year, which falls on Tuesday. People around Asia celebrate the start of the Year of the Horse in the Chinese zodiac. And the headline, "Celebrations kick off for the Year of the Horse." Other articles from the front page follow. Companies beset by cost are jacking up prices again. Higher tariffs, labor, and health expenses force brands to act across many sectors. By Ruth Simon. Companies from Levi Strauss to McCormick, among others, say they are raising prices early this year on items from blue jeans and spices to housewares and industrial products. After holding the line for several months, companies, big and small, have begun a new round of price increases, in some cases by high single-digit percentage points. Companies had raised prices last year after tariffs pushed up cost. Yet, in the fall, many tabled increases while some offered discounts for holiday shoppers. The pricing break is over. Many companies typically raise prices at the start of the new year, yet increases appear to be stronger than normal for January for electronics, appliances, and other durable goods, said UBS economist Alan Detmeister. Some companies have blamed tariffs for their increases, while others, especially small businesses, also blame higher wages and health insurance costs that they say they can't absorb or share with suppliers. Prices on the most affordable imported goods are up by 2.3% since dipping at the end of November, according to data through February 10th, collected by Alberto Cavallo, a Harvard Business School professor who tracks daily online prices at major U.S. retailers. The Adobe Digital Price Index found online prices posted their largest monthly increase in a dozen years in January, driven by higher prices for electronics, computers, appliances, furniture, and bedding. Columbia Sportswear said it is raising prices of spring and fall merchandise by, on average, a high single-digit % after mostly avoiding increases for fall and winter goods. The company said it has also renegotiated prices with its factories and taken other steps to reduce cost. Higher costs can be particularly challenging for small businesses, which typically have thinner profit margins than big companies and fewer ways to offset expenses. By raising prices, companies risk turning off buyers. Turnover in CEOs is most in over a decade. About one CEO in 9 was replaced last year across 1,500 publicly traded companies. Companies are changing bosses more often and hiring younger ones. By Theo Francis. Faster CEO turnover at U.S. public companies has put the biggest class of incoming chief executives in years at the helm of massive enterprises, and the newcomers are younger and less experienced than before. About one CEO in 9 was replaced last year across 1,500 of the biggest publicly traded companies, a new analysis finds. That is the highest rate since at least 2010, when the U.S. was emerging from the financial crisis. The pace doesn't appear to be slowing. Dozens more companies brought in new CEOs in January or early February, including Walmart, Procter & Gamble, Lululemon, Athletica. And on a single day in early February, Disney, PayPal, and HP announced new CEOs, and last week Kroger named a former Walmart executive to head the grocer. The result is a grand experiment in leadership as companies grapple with the swift rise of artificial intelligence, the unraveling of long-established trade practices, and an unsettled economy and geopolitical order. More than 80% of last year's 168 incoming CEOs were first-timers, with no prior experience running public companies or other major standalone enterprises. 2/3 of them have never served on a corporate board before. When companies did bring in older and more experienced chief, it often reflected a scramble in tough circumstances. New female CEOs grew scarcer last year. Just 9% of new appointments went to women, down from 15% a year earlier. Overall, about 9% of CEOs in the S&P 1500 are women, including 46 in the S&P 500, Spencer Stewart said. We're in a new environment, and someone who's going to replay the playbooks of the past is not necessarily right, said James Citron, head of global CEO practice at executive recruiting firm Spencer Stewart, which produced the report. If the CEO doesn't get momentum, both internally with operating performance and also with investors, then boards are more impatient even than they were. Many of the issues they face are a departure from conventional business challenges. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Deep Rifts Leave U.S.-Europe in a Tense Marriage by Yaroslav Trofimov, Munich. Ask a European official who attended the weekend's Munich Security Conference about the state of the transatlantic relationship, and you are likely to hear metaphors about dealing with a troubled, possibly abusive spouse. Secretary of State Marco Rubio delivered a less pugnacious message when compared with last year's Munich conference. Back then, Vice President J.D. Vance launched a blistering attack on the governments of Europe's largest nations and embraced their far-right political opponents. Rubio, by contrast, got a standing ovation after highlighting the importance of transatlantic ties and common history and culture. Yet, though the Europeans and the Trump administration are on speaking terms once again, there are few illusions. The deep fissure caused by January's crisis over Greenland has been papered over, but not fixed. What used to be an alliance of kindred souls is viewed by both sides today as a marriage of convenience, loveless, and lacking basic trust. Now there is a new equation that you don't really know who is your friend and who is your ally. Kaja Kallas, the European Commission's head of foreign and security policy, said in an interview in Munich, ministers, lawmakers, and military leaders who packed Munich's Bayerisch Hof Hotel over the weekend acknowledged that the common values that once bound Washington to its European allies aren't so common anymore. The focus of conversations has now shifted onto the bond that remains, hard security interests that are less susceptible to ideological rifts. Eldridge Colby, the Pentagon's Undersecretary for Policy, told the attendees in Munich that he isn't sure that the one-time hosannas and shibboleths about shared values between Europe and the U.S. are true, at least when it comes to his part of the political spectrum. Yet, he added, the deduction is not being, hey, let's pull out, but rather, let's ground our partnership in something more enduring and durable and real, like shared interest. We have a shared interest in a Europe that can defend NATO territory, and so I would recommend focusing on pragmatic, nuts and bolts kind of stuff. Highlighting the positive, many European officials noted that, ahead of Munich, Colby reaffirmed at the North Atlantic Treaty Organization ministerial meeting in Brussels the enduring U.S. extended nuclear deterrence in Europe, even as he insisted that European forces will be primarily responsible for the continent's conventional defense. Colby also praised the strides that Germany and several other European allies have made in expanding their military capabilities over the past year. It is important, after the discussions we had over the last couple of weeks, to reaffirm that, on a fundamental level, we are allies, we are friends, we share the same history, our connections go deep in every direction, and it is acknowledged and appreciated that many countries in Europe are stepping up. Netherlands Defense Minister Ruben Brekelmans said in an interview. Farmers are aging, the family business is in peril. Rising costs, weak prices, and a trade hit are pushing more farms to the brink, making it harder to find successors. By Patrick Thomas, Marshall, Illinois. Don Gwinnett is running out of time. The fifth-generation farmer still wakes early each morning to tend to roughly 1,000 acres of corn and soybeans and 40 cattle. But 4 decades of grueling work, a bout with prostate cancer, and surgery to replace both of his hips with titanium implants have taken their toll. The 74-year-old estimates that he can maintain the current workload for a couple more years. Under the gaze of generations of Gwinneps in black and white photos, he gathers his 4 siblings to chart the future of their family's farm and contemplates a day when a Gwinnett no longer cares for the land that runs along Gwinnett Road. The natural choice to take over, his son and daughter, left for college and now work in corporate fields. His siblings made the same decision years earlier. It's disappointing to me, Gwinnett says, holding back tears, that the way the dice were rolled, and you have to accept what life gives you. The number of farmers in America has been shrinking for years, but rising costs and weak commodity prices are pushing more families out at a faster rate. In 2025, 315 farms filed for bankruptcy, up 46% from 2024, U.S. court data shows. Those left are aging. There are more farmers 75 and older than under the age of 35, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. They are facing tough choices and tougher prospects. Many farmers already rely on government bailouts to stay afloat. In 2024, Congress approved $10 billion in bailout funds and $21 billion in natural disaster relief for growers and ranchers. The Trump administration's trade policies exacerbated the situation, pushing more families and communities to the brink. In December, the White House pledged $12 billion in aid to farmers. Thousands across the U.S. are closing the book on farms that have been in their families for generations, either by selling to a larger entity or declaring bankruptcy. It has transformed food production and local communities. Critics of farm consolidation say it also led to less crop diversity, presenting risks for the broader food system. The disappearance of small farms has carried steep consequences for rural America, upending the transfer of wealth between generations, and the tough economics are making the search for successors more challenging. Children of farmers today have more opportunities to work beyond agriculture, and families are typically smaller, shrinking the pool of candidates. Seated around the living room, Gwinnett and his siblings discuss plans for land potentially worth millions of dollars. While Gwinnett has sole oversight of the acres and animals, his parents left the family farm in trust that split ownership between him, David, Susan, Sally, and Dan. Every year, Gwinnett pays his siblings rent based on the farm's performance. The profits aren't much, but it could be worse. The future of American farming isn't pretty in Gwinnett's view. He predicts it will resemble a contract model in which farmers work the land for someone else, pay rent, and are personally responsible for the debt incurred to keep the farm running. Fewer family farmers will exist. The pride they brought will be lost too. North Korea defector explains cyber scam. Kim Jong-un's regime uses proceeds for its nuclear program. By Dassel Yoon, Seoul. On a California-based company's internal directory, he was just another face in the grid of remote workers, a prolific software developer with a polished LinkedIn profile and an IP address tracing back to the Midwest. In reality, the man behind the coding lived in a state-run dormitory in China. His name was Anton Ko, and he wasn't Chinese. Ko belonged to a pipeline of elite North Korean cyber operatives identified, trained, and dispatched overseas by the Kim regime. Their mission: generate hard currency for Pyongyang by stealing foreigners' identities to land remote IT jobs, with no gig more coveted than those from the U.S. I'm a software engineer, and I have a great opportunity for you, Ko said. He messaged dozens of Americans daily. When remote working peaked during the pandemic, it could be a lot of money for you too. Ko, who defected to South Korea in recent years, provides a rare window into Kim Jong-un's digital warriors, who have managed to infiltrate hundreds of Fortune 500 companies, according to estimates from Google's Mandiant division. More than 40 countries have been targeted or involved in North Korea's cyber work, according to a U.S.-led consortium of 11 nations documenting Pyongyang's sanctions violations. The cyber agents are largely based in China and Russia, where the internet connection is stronger and won't trace back to North Korea. They generated up to $800 million for the Kim regime in 2024, the group said. U.S. companies sit atop the list of targets because of the high pay and intelligence gathering value. But the North Koreans don't just work alone. They seek to appear more credible to employers by paying Americans to host so-called laptop farms, where company-issued computers can be shipped and then used remotely by the North Koreans to appear online as if they were U.S.-based personnel. In November, the Justice Department said 4 Americans pleaded guilty to helping North Korean IT workers hold work at more than 136 U.S. firms. These overseas IT workers are the cash cows among North Korea's illicit overseas labor, which helps funnel resources to Pyongyang's nuclear program. The Kim regime is known to seize up to 90% of a given worker's earnings, said Nam Bada, who interviewed defectors, including Cole and other former IT workers, for a report on a Pyongyang's cyber operations. Now for other articles within the paper. Ukraine crews battle to keep lights on, by Oksana Grisenko. Kyiv, Ukraine. It was late January, and an elite Ukrainian team grabbed their tools for a special operation critical to their country's resistance against Russia: an underwater drone, a hammer, and a chisel. Their job was to repair a crack in a concrete structure at a power plant caused by a Russian missile strike. At risk was power and heating for thousands of homes in Ukraine's capital. The challenge: the crack was underwater, and the repairs would have to take place as Russian missiles continued to land. The team succeeded in an operation lasting 6 days, a compelling example of the courage and resilience of repair crews and power station workers fighting to keep the power and heat on as Russia seeks to destroy morale with relentless aerial attacks. It was definitely one of our hardest tasks ever, said Andrei Vasenko, the 45-year-old head of the dive team from the State Emergency Service. Relentless Russian missile strikes have targeted Ukrainian power stations and electrical infrastructure, leaving most of the population with only a few hours of power a day, Ukrainian officials said. Russian attacks have taken a toll on energy workers, killing more than 160 in nearly 4 years of war, according to the Ukrainian Energy Ministry. More than 100 emergency service workers have been killed and more than 500 wounded since the invasion, Ukraine's emergency service said. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, Judge Leon educates Pete Hegseth. The military version of lawfare loses in embarrassing fashion. President Trump's lawfare campaign against his opponents isn't working any better than it did for Joe Biden, Jack Smith, and Letitia James against Mr. Trump. The latest example is the legal rebuke against Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's attempt to punish Senator Mark Kelly. Mr. Kelly, an Arizona Democrat, has been pointed in criticizing various Trump administration policies, notably its bombing campaign against alleged drug boats in the Caribbean. The former Navy captain joined several other members of Congress in taping a video advising current officers they can refuse illegal orders. This reiteration of a truism enraged Mr. Trump, who said in a social media post that the Democrats were guilty of seditious behavior, punishable by death. As we wrote at the time, the members' comments were an unwise attempt to politicize the military, but they weren't sedition and are protected by the First Amendment. Enter Mr. Hegseth, who takes tango lessons whenever Mr. Trump says dance. The secretary issued a letter of censure against Senator Kelly for conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline in the armed forces and conduct unbecoming an officer. He also began a retirement grade proceeding that could result in Mr. Kelly losing his captain's rank and pension. The senator sued in federal court and has now won a preliminary injunction to stop the proceeding. Judge Richard Leon issued his legal takedown late last week, and it deserves more attention as a defense of free speech. Appointed by George W. Bush, Judge Leon is no activist liberal, but he doesn't mince words when he sees an abuse of the law. The judge notes that Mr. Hegseth relies on the well-established doctrine that members of the military enjoy less rigorous First Amendment protection given the need for military order and discipline. But he adds that, Unfortunately for Secretary Hegseth, no court has ever extended those principles to retired service members, much less a retired service member serving in Congress and exercising oversight responsibility over the military. This court will not be the first to do so. It's downhill from there for the Secretary. The judge finds that Mr. Kelly's comments are the definition of protected speech under the First Amendment, and that the Pentagon cited no precedent that limits on speech for active duty officers apply to retirees. The judge says Mr. Hegseth's actions were a clear case of illegal retaliation for speech he disliked. If legislators do not feel free to express their views and the views of their constituents without fear of reprisal by the executive, our representative system of government cannot function, Judge Leon writes. This legal humiliation is becoming a habit for Trump officials. A grand jury last week refused to rubber stamp U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro's attempt to indict Mr. Kelly and the other members of Congress who taped the video. Ms. Pirro had sought an indictment for interfering with the loyalty, morale, or discipline of the U.S. Armed Forces. News reports say not a single member of the grand jury voted to indict. A stunning rebuke for Ms. Pirro, who also seems to believe that her priority is lawfare instead of pursuing actual criminals. It will be a healthy development if more Americans decide they've had enough of political prosecutions. Mr. Trump seems to expect lavish fealty in his deputies, or at least his deputies behave as if they think he does. But as they lose in court, they are doing their reputations no favors. Ocasio-Cortez does geopolitics. She grabs attention in Munich, but stumbles over Taiwan 101. President Trump absorbs the world's media oxygen, and he likes it that way. So let's check in with the political competition for a change. Progressive Democratic Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York turned up at the Munich Security Conference over the weekend for a taste of geopolitics, but she couldn't answer one of the biggest questions in world affairs. Would and should the United States commit troops to defend Taiwan if China were to move on the island democracy? Give Ms. Ocasio-Cortez credit for an unscripted answer. I think that this is such a, I think that this is of course a very long-standing policy of the United States. And I think what we are hoping for is that we want to make sure that we never get to that point, and we want to make sure that we are moving in all of our economic research and our global positions to avoid any such confrontation and for that question to even arise. The Congresswoman from New York, who may want to be president, paused more than once and took roughly 30 seconds to offer those insights. The soliloquy is especially impressive because Ms. Ocasio-Cortez could have taken cover under the fact that U.S. policy is to decline to answer the question. but that would require understanding the concept of strategic ambiguity toward the island of 23 million free people. It's nice to hear that Miss Ocasio-Cortez wants to make sure that we never get to that point, though deterrence demands military power and the willingness to use it, not economic research and global positions, whatever those are. Mr. Trump is no great communicator of America's vital interest in a free Pacific, but he understands deterrence at an instinctual level. Voters may not like the frenetic Trump show, but they know that China, under the Communist Party, is a hostile power. Democrats will continue to lose elections if they appear not to recognize the world's threats. America's allies are weary from having to put out Mr. Trump's diplomatic fires from Greenland to capricious tariffs. But navigating a turbulent Trump term may be remembered as halcyon or pleasant days for the free world if the United States ends up with a president AOC. Rubio's tough love for Europe. His message is better than Vance's, but then there's Ukraine. The Trump administration has rattled America's friends in Europe, sometimes for the better, defense spending, but often for the worse, Greenland. Secretary of State Marco Rubio offered a more conciliatory message in a speech this weekend, but the underlying theme remains one of tough love for the continent. Mr. Rubio at the Munich Security Conference recalled the Cold War when much of the world lived behind an iron curtain and the rest looked like it soon would follow. The West was thought to be in terminal decline, but our predecessors recognized that decline was a choice, and it was a choice they refused to make. America and Europe are now at another inflection point. Mr. Rubio offered the administration's by now familiar critique about Europe's policy mistakes on mass migration, defense, climate, and energy. But he rooted that criticism in the shared history and values of Western civilization. We are connected spiritually, and we are connected culturally, he said. We believe that Europe must survive because the two great wars of the last century serve for us as history's constant reminder that ultimately our destiny is and will always be intertwined with yours. Mr. Rubio outlined a renewed transatlantic alliance ready to defend our people, to safeguard our interest, and to preserve the freedom of action that allows us to shape our own destiny, not one that exists to operate a global welfare state and atone for the purported sins of past generations. He also made a crucial point that the alliance shouldn't be constrained by multilateral institutions beyond its control. He mentioned the United Nations in particular for its failure to stop any recent conflict of note. The administration's liberal internationalist critics at home and in Europe too often mistake this critique for U.S. unilateralism when it is practical realism. Mr. Rubio's speech won praise in Munich and from nearly every corner of President Trump's domestic coalition. It is amusing to watch some on the right suggest Mr. Rubio is inventing some new foreign policy cocktail, as if the world began yesterday. Mr. Rubio is drawing directly from Ronald Reagan's playbook of conservative internationalism, unapologetic about U.S. leadership and the superiority of freedom, anchored by threats to the American people and their interest, wary that diplomacy and commerce by themselves can resolve the world's differences. This worldview still represents the best formula for dealing with the accumulating threats to the U.S., namely an axis among China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. Mr. Trump wants America to be the big player in every region, but his greatest failure as president is that he won't or can't articulate his larger principles. Vice President J.D. Vance made motions to a shared culture with Europe in his speech at the same security conference last year. But Mr. Vance all but told Europe it was free to plan its own funeral and gave oxygen to Europe's right-wing fringes that are sympathetic to Moscow. Mr. Rubio is also offering a far better vision than Canada's Mark Carney, the hero of Davos, whose idea for replacing U.S. leadership with a coalition of the world's middle powers is delusional and cynical domestic politics. The big caveat to Mr. Rubio's message is Ukraine, which, like it or not, is the current front line of Western civilization. On that score, it wasn't reassuring that after Munich, Mr. Rubio headed to Hungary and Slovakia, Russia's two best friends in Europe. The U.S. continues to behave like a mediator of the Ukraine-Russia war rather than taking the side of the West. Mr. Rubio's good words about shared values won't mean much if a rotten peace is imposed on Ukraine. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the opinion pages, Jimmy Lai and Trump's Nobel Peace Prize by William McGurn. Say this for Donald Trump. It isn't hard to figure out what he wants because he tells us. What he wants now is a Nobel Peace Prize. The Norwegian Nobel Committee is more than aware of this. The president has made the case for himself publicly several times with characteristic understatement. I can't think of anybody in history, he said, that should get the Nobel Prize more than me. And I don't want to be bragging, but nobody else settled wars. Many will gag at the idea of the 47th president taking his place alongside Andrei Sakharov, Martin Luther King Jr., Lech Walesa, and other Peace Prize luminaries. Venezuela's Maria Corina Machado, the most recent laureate, has already presented President Trump with her Nobel medal as a sign of gratitude for deposing Venezuela dictator Nicolas Maduro, though the prize isn't transferable. But what if Mr. Trump based his claim on his rather solid record of freeing the unjustly imprisoned around the world? His success in liberating deserving people who would otherwise be rotting away in prison, even if he was motivated only by vanity, suggests he may very well deserve the Nobel. Now imagine how much stronger this argument would be if Mr. Trump made good on his campaign promise to get publisher Jimmy Lai out of his windowless Hong Kong prison cell. Mr. Lai, who is 78, was recently sentenced to 20 years after being convicted of publishing seditious material and colluding with foreign powers in what many observers say was a sham trial. Jimmy Lai is a man of faith and peace, and caging him is a monstrous ongoing act of political and personal violence, says Jonathan Price of Doughty Street Chambers, part of Mr. Lai's international legal team. If Donald Trump were to secure his release, that would be celebrated in every corner of the world. Mr. Trump has sold himself for a Nobel Peace Prize on the grounds that he has resolved 8 wars. In addition to getting an agreement in Gaza, the president says he has resolved conflicts from Egypt and Ethiopia to Cambodia and Thailand. It's too early to tell, of course, whether these deals mark a lasting peace or a brief interlude before fighting resumes. The president's efforts to free political prisoners may seem less grand, but their success is immediate and undeniable. Once a prisoner is out, he is out, and the whole world can see for itself. In his first term, Mr. Trump says he brought 58 hostages home. A State Department spokesman says the president has made it a priority to bring home Americans held hostage or wrongfully detained abroad. In that sense, he was sworn in for his second term. More than 100 Americans have been brought home. In addition, 5 months ago, he signed an executive order beefing up the Robert Livingston Hostage Recovery and Hostage Taking Accountability Act. It was named for a former FBI agent who disappeared in Iran in 2007 and enacted in 2020. Among the powers it gives the president is the authority to designate countries that wrongfully detain an American and impose consequences. That's important because freeing those unjustly imprisoned hasn't been a priority for many administrations. First, in an individual's case, however horribly he's been treated, he's only one case. And that case can look small next to the larger conflicts that dominate foreign affairs. Never mind that it doesn't look that way to people who are freed or to the loved ones and admirers. One of the little appreciated accomplishments of the Trump administration has been freeing political prisoners around the world, says Mark Clifford, a friend of Mr. Lai's, who served on the board of his media company and now runs the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong Foundation. He's gone toe-to-toe with brutal dictatorships to win prisoners' releases, notably in Russia, Belarus, and Afghanistan, though he's gotten little credit. China is a tough negotiating partner, although 3 unjustly detained Americans were swapped in the waning days of the Biden administration. So Xi Jinping has shown that he will deal when he believes it's in his interest to do so. Mr. Xi can make a deal in April when Mr. Trump goes to Beijing for talks the president says will include the release of Mr. Lai. The talks will take place during the part of the year when the Nobel Committee actively considers nominations. Messrs. Lai and Trump have been nominated separately for this year's prize. When Henry of Navarre sought to become king in the 16th century, the Protestant aspirant faced fierce opposition within Catholic France. So Henry converted, and with classic French cynicism, is famously reported to have said, "Paris is well worth a mess." It's the same for Mr. Trump. If, against all odds, he succeeded in springing this champion of human freedom from prison, would anyone say it wasn't worth a Nobel? Letter to the editor. Americans feel the weight of Trump's tariffs. Regarding foreign countries bear the burden of tariffs, February 11th, based on a recent experience I had, I believe Peter Navarro's contention that foreign countries bear the economic burden is more theoretical than grounded in reality. For several years, I've purchased tea from a merchant in Canada. An order placed last November went through without a hitch. It was paid for by credit card and delivered by FedEx. But I recently received an invoice with U.S. Customs documents from the carrier for a duty of 35% on the purchase. I can't say I feel liberated by the tariffs imposed on our neighbor to the north. It's simply a tax that consumers will pay one way or the other. From James Kalenko, Bedford, Virginia. Same topic. In his letter, Mr. Navarro asserts that foreign countries bear the burden. How ironic that in the same day's edition of the Journal, this headline appeared in the business section. Ford reveals $900 million tariff hit. From William Goldman. Los Angeles. Mr. Navarro carefully avoids the use of a single number to support his theory that foreign countries rather than Americans feel the weight of tariffs. Alas, when I go shopping, his theory feels incorrect. From Jerry Maudry, Berkeley, California. The Pepper and Salt cartoon today shows a couple seated at a dining table, and the man says, "It takes two to be codependent." You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the February 17th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful day or evening.
You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Volunteer radio readers broadcast daily readings, 24 hours a day of newspapers, magazines, books, and other printed matter to area people who are blind or have a print disability, who are provided reading radios. The Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service has broadcast almost 40 years of radio readings to those without sight. Our broadcast signal is provided at no charge by WNED. Radio reading studios are at 1199 Harlem Road in Cheektowaga. For more information on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, call 716-821-5555.